They never lifted the mace in triumph. No parades, no documentaries, no grand farewell. Yet for nearly a decade, South Africa quietly ruled the world in Test cricket. Under Graeme Smith, they conquered England, humbled Australia, and never lost an away series for a good part of a decade.
How did a team with no fanfare become one of the most dominant in modern Test history? And why has no one really ever talked about it? Welcome to the story of a micro dynasty. South Africa in the 2010s, relentless, under celebrated, and absolutely elite.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Reverse Sweep Show. As ever, I am your host SS, and joining me is my co-host AB. I know it's the IPL playoffs season, AB, but I would still ask you what you have been up to, if you have been following Karun Nair's exploits with India A.
Yeah. Of course, I have to. So much going on around in the world cricket right now. With the IPL coming to the final stages in this season, playoffs nearing. Mumbai Indians doing Mumbai Indians things. RCB giving all the fans a ray of hope. And then Karun Nair in England scoring a double century. That was so refreshing to watch. How about you, SS? What have you been up to? What have you been following?
Yeah, as we get closer to the IPL finals, I think I am eating the humblest of humble pies because we said very categorically in season one that LSG will perform better than RCB. And when I was writing the blog post for our website, I did say Punjab will beat RCB. That didn't happen. Luckily, MI did MI things and saved me a bit. Uh, but I want to ask you now, we have got three teams remaining in the fray. Who is your pick to win the IPL? My pick still continues to be MI.
So I really like an underdog story, SS. I want a new winner this IPL, and I'm rooting for Punjab to defeat MI this year. Although I live in Mumbai and should be a Mumbai Indian supporter, but then I am also rooting for a new winner this season. So I'm really hoping for RCB versus Punjab in the finals, and I want Virat Kohli to win a title, and then we cannot rule out the outcome that Virat Kohli wins, retires from even the IPL, and retires even before MSD.
That would be
Who-
quite a story.
Yeah, we can imagine, right? Like that's what we do on this podcast. SS, who's your pick?
I continue to go and pick MI, as I said. But just before we see the second of our playoffs today, later in the day, I think it's still time to come back to our dynasty series of the Reverse Sweep Show. We talked about the great West Indies team, the Australian team, and today we are going to profile the other WTC finalist, South Africa. And it's what we were discussing off air. They had some sort of a mini dynasty in the 2010s, but I think for the benefit of our listeners and viewers, I think it will be very nice to think about what mini dynasty is. At least in my opinion, mini dynasty is that you have a short period of dominance with some great players and resilience, but it's not sustainable like in the long run for South Africa and just like it we had for West Indies and Australia. And I
Yeah,
think
and
today's episode we are going to profile a bit more about South African team.
yeah, absolutely. And when I think about world cricket evolving over a period of time, SS, I like to think about the West Indian dominance phase, then the Australian dominance phase, and now around the more contemporary era, I feel it's more of that balance of power kind of an era, where we see these teams come up with these smaller periods of dominance, but not really creating a dynasty. England had their time, India had their time, and now South Africa also had their time back in the 2010s, and that is what we talk about in more detail. The other, as you said, the other WTC finalists. So it's just
I
like
I
for
think I think also interesting to see because it's very nice that you mentioned about England, India, and Australia. It seems that South Africa always crop up in the top echelons of world cricket when couple of the big three are not doing that well. I think, as you mentioned, we'll talk more about the 2010s, but even now, India is going through a transition. England is in the late baseball phase when people have found out a bit and they are not that consistent. Only Australia is, and that's how South Africa got into it. Yeah, they sent out weekend teams at the start of the WTC cycle, and here they are in the finals. But I think
yeah,
we are going to
absolutely.
approach the episode a bit differently. I think we are going to talk about in a more storyline fashion about what are those pivotal things that we remember about that South Africa, mini dynasty. So passing it to you, AB, for telling our viewers the first storyline that you think about.
Yeah, and this is more from my slightly earlier days of watching cricket. We go back in time to the year 2010. India is touring South Africa, and it's a three-test match series. The first match was won by South Africa. Second test was where we won our first ever test match in South Africa, and then we are in the third test, the series on the line, and it is the second innings of the test match, and Sachin and Gambhir are facing off Steyn and Morkel. And in Gambhir's own words, one of the fieriest spells of pace bowling that he has ever faced. Sachin went on air and said that the bowling from Steyn, that was the best spell that he has ever faced in his career. And it was almost an hour long period. The two scored hardly 8 or 9 runs in that 1 hour, hardly even able to rotate the strike. But that was one instance that really comes to my mind when I think about that South African pace attack, troubling players across, even going to Australia and troubling the Australian batters. Bowlers like Morny Morkel stay in world class and performing across the world. And that one spell that they bowled to Sachin and Gambhir, like that showed class through and through.
Iconic spell, I think, fascinating phase of Test cricket. Sachin probably in his last great phase of his long career and facing up against Steyn. I think that was a theatre, and I think we all look who are believe Test cricket is the purest form. We always look back at that phase. Very interestingly, amazing cricket to watch.
Now, SS, the same question back at you. What's one of those iconic stories that you remember from that South African team?
Yes, there are so many to pick from. I think, but since you started off with Indian batters slugging it out against South African paces, I want to pick the other side of the equation for South Africa. I remember Hashim Amla in ABD. I mean, ABD we all saw during the IPL and how Bangalore crowd came to love him, Mr. 360. But he also had the other flavor. Remember that Blockfest in Delhi, a series in which South Africa did not do that well. I think they lost 3-0, and this was probably the last phase of their mini dynasty, so to speak. But then Amla, who had always had such an exceptional record versus India, I think they batted 143 overs for 143 runs. They were skittled out at the end, but ABD made like 40 runs of 300 balls, similar for Amla as well. They showed that they could grind it out, and they they really did pretty well. And I mean, Indians also remember that series and that particular phase of the match very vividly, which shows at least the class and the respect that they had for those batters. And talking about Hashim Amla, he I mean, we always kept looking for Virat Kohli's ODI records. Whenever he used to cross 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 runs, Amla was always ahead of him. Amla was an amazing test cricketer as well. I mean, triple hundred in England when they won the series there. Had double hundreds versus India, had hundreds in both innings versus India. I remember the 2010 series, which was a 1-1. And Amla made 600, 700 runs in those two test match series. And the people were asking, our foreign minister, can we just get his visa taken away because he always troubles Indians so much. Exceptional batter. So Amla was the best batter, I think, at that period of time in ABD, like the most complete batter. And I think those two were like the linchpin of South African batting, which allowed their bowling to really impress upon despite not having a quality spinner.
Yeah, and just the sheer versatility that ABD had during his peak as a test batter, as a T20 batter, as a ODI batter, that is still something that baffles me to this day. Watching him bat in T20s, in IPLs, in Jinnaswamy, and then looking at this blockfest that he produced, it's just crazy how versatile, in fact, not just ABD, but this entire South African team was.
And let's not forget that Nagpur Test match in 2010 when they won in double century, I think 253 or something from Amla. That was a Test match where South Africa won by innings versus India, which doesn't happen too often. And it was Dale Steyn that you mentioned. He took a 7 for in Nagpur and completely destroyed India.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing which strikes me, and again, more from one of the recent episodes that we have done, like when India went down under Australia, we had won two back-to-back series down under, and this was our time to do a three-peat. And our North Star for doing that was the South African team who had done a three-peat in Australia. and knowing how dominant Australia are at home, that is something which is still an effort that no other team has been able to do in the recent times. And so this is another thing which I remember the South African team going touring so well. They had not lost a series for a good part of a decade in away matches, in away series. So they had gone to England, won there. They had gone to Australia. They did a three-peat. They could not win as frequently in India. They were able to draw a few series here and there. But then definitely this three-peat that they did in Australia, that to me still is a gold standard of what away or what touring teams have been able to achieve in Australia. And this is not just one player who stepped up. We have in the 2010 to 2008 series, in fact, Cullis scoring centuries. Then the next time they toured, we had ABD scoring centuries, Hashim Amla scoring centuries, and the last time that they were able to do around 2016, we had even JP Dumini scoring a century, stepping up and scoring that
I mean,
crucial
JP
century.
Duminy was part of that big chase in Perth where he chased 400 plus, and he made a big innings as well. So winning there with that combination, with that bowling attack three times in a row, and 2008 Australia wasn't bad. I mean, they were still winning series. They had winning 16 test matches in a row, and beating that team with that confidence. Kallis didn't have a great record in Australia, but then he corrected it. I mean, amazing. Three-peat in Australia is like really, really under the radar fact in cricket history.
And we always talk about that passing of the baton. We spoke of that when we were discussing Australia's test dominance, the 95 series where Australia defeated West Indies, and that was a passing of the baton. And I think 2008 series where South Africa defeated Australia and Australia was also kind of the same, right? Australian test dynasty fading away, and then new powers coming up in world cricket. England defeating Australia and Australia, then South Africa doing the same thrice in a row.
Yeah, and I think all ta starts with right from the top. Graeme Smith. I mean, we talk about South African cricket's surge, and we cannot forget about a young captain appointed after the debacle in the 2003 ODI World Cup. He leads a young team to England, and he makes double centuries consecutively, which is like a Bradman-esque thing to do, I remember. And people were really doubting him. Exceptional home record. He was a fine opener, 47 average at home, but 54 away, a champion of fourth innings, 50 plus average in fourth innings, and of course that famous memory SCG. I think it was a 2012 or 13 series, coming out broken hand versus Mitch Johnson, trying to fight for his country. I think that was grit, leading by example. Like everyone remembers it. There are so many clips and so much folklore around it. Tremendous captain, instilled so much role clarity in his team along with Mickey Arthur. I was reading an article on Cricketer, I think, and he was talking about how they made specific plans in subcontinent that always use the bouncer, try to stop Indians from scoring boundaries, attack them, don't let them feed like good length deliveries because they will make them pull because Indians are great square cutters but not great pullers. I mean, Mickey Arthur, Graeme Smith, that kind of a leadership thing. I mean, amazing. He captained almost 100 times for South Africa. Exceptional leader. And was really held with a very strong core of players as well. But I think Graeme Smith was a huge cog. And I think when we think about that South African team, we will think always of Graeme Smith. And it's a testament that now he has a management role at Cricket South Africa level as well. He's really respected.
Definitely. I think the only other captain in Test cricket that I can think of who captained in so many tests was probably Stephen Fleming in New Zealand. And New Zealand is known for giving that stability in the leadership roles. Stephen Fleming, Brendan McCullum, Kane Williamson, but I have not seen that happen in a lot of other test teams across the world, and Graeme Smith has to be one of those exceptions.
I mean, you need to really succeed. I mean, you are like Border, War, Lloyd, Ponting, that you're really succeeding with your team for a long period of time, then only you will. But South Africa, between 2000, I mean, they will win series at home a lot. They will struggle a bit away. Even when you said about 2008 victory, they did not like become totally dominant. But South Africa never moved from that model. I mean, because they trusted Smith, the role clarity he gave to the players and the captaincy and the mindset that he had, that even despite the tumultuous times in ICC events as well, he continued to be a terrific leader, well trusted in Test cricket.
You talk about role clarity, SS, and that reminds me of not just the South African superstars, the galactic superstars that they had in Kallis's, ABD's, Hashim Amla, Graeme Smith, but also the role players that they had. For any team to succeed, you need to have those superstars that the team is built around, but also need to have those very, very effective role players. And one of them has to be Vernon Philander, the perfect third wheel in the South African bowling attack. As we spoke about him, Bhuvi on steroids back in the day,
Yeah.
almost unplayable on South African wickets that are helping seam and swing bowling conditions. And he was so effective. He had such a phenomenal debut, and uh, coming into international cricket, he was first 5 Test matches, 50 wickets, and fastest to 50 wickets for a South African pacer. So super effective in his time, and he added that perfect balance. After you had Steyn and Morkel wrecking havoc, you had Vernon Philander coming in, and plus because South Africa never had that perfect spinner or a very strong elite spinner, so Vernon Philander also had to fill in that role, that vacuum that South Africa always had.
It is like when you say Philander is like Bhuvi on steroids, I hope Shardul is like a very light version of Philander when we go and play him in England over Nitish Reddy. Because similar big backside, as they say, both have, and they can both swing the ball. But yeah, I mean, Philander was an exception, I think, last 4 5 years. And it's not just him. I mean, the others is like Faf, JP Duminy, Dean Elgar, Ashwell Prince, Wayne Parnell. There were so many because ultimately it's a team game, and in Test cricket you need to pick 20 wickets. But Philander would do that for them, and that's why one of the big reasons why they succeeded, continue to succeed in especially England and South Africa.
Yeah.
But last but not the least, we cannot leave the storyline section without discussing probably the greatest player of this generation, if not the entire history of cricket. It warrants a specific section on him. Jack Kallis is essentially, as the famous graphic that used to pop up on the screens and still pops up a lot on Twitter as well. He's Rahul Dravid versus plus Zahir Khan, has the same number of runs as Rahul and pretty much the same number of wickets as Zahir. I mean, people sometimes I still find him underrated, which is the most amazing opinion about him, that people still don't rate him as much as the other cricketers of that great generation. Made runs everywhere. People said he didn't make runs in India and Australia. Later on he did. He made 173 in India, a couple of centuries in Australia as well. Later on won in IPL with KKR as well. Exceptional ODI player, great fourth bowler. Effectively, South Africa played with 12 cricketers in their team for a good 15 years. Great slip fielder, bucket hands. I mean, what else do you want? Wish if Smith wasn't there, he would have captained a lot. But he's probably the most multifaceted cricketer that we know about, and Kallis is a legend of the game.
Of course, any budding cricketer, you show him the stats, they will take either of his careers, either as a bowler
Yeah.
or as a batter. And then he brought both of them to the table, and plus was a gun fielder as well in the slips.
Yeah, I mean, on Twitter, I sometimes see this argument that Kallis wasn't as great a bowler. His stats are not that great if you look just beyond the wickets. But I mean, he's a fourth bowler who is really good for South African conditions. But just take his batting. I mean, you don't have to agree to his all-round capabilities. Just look at his batting, 13,280 odd runs. I mean, great average as well, made
And
runs everywhere.
And another very less talked about topic is around longevity. You look at even elite players like Hashim Amla, Virat Kohli. Virat Kohli has now retired, and at one point of time, you would have thought that he will retire with 12,000, 13,000 runs. But we saw the dip in his form, in his run making abilities, and same with Hashim Amla. Like after a prolific run, that just dropped, and the same goes with bowlers as well. And then just add all rounders. Like how many all rounders that you see in today's time who can actually replicate that? Someone like a
And remain
Hardik Pandya
fit.
doesn't even.
And
Yeah,
remain fit for
absolutely.
that period of time.
Absolutely. Someone like Ben Stokes or Hardik Pandya, who are the elite pace bowling all rounders of today's time, they either avoid certain formats or they
They
bowl
lose out on
very
one skill.
infrequently.
They lose out on one skill,
Absolutely.
that they will become only batter or only bowler or play only one format. He used to play both the formats, and ODIs used to happen a lot. This was the era where people will play 350 odd ODIs, and he will do both skills in all conditions. Amazing, big lion-hearted cricketer who had all the skills in the world and still had the hard work and the fitness regime to match that. Right. Today, I think we are going to experiment a bit on our hypothetical section. I
Yeah.
think thinking about great Western movies and the good, the bad, the ugly comes to mind. So we are going to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly of this mini dynasty that South African cricket had. What was the bad thing that it couldn't become like a full-fledged dynasty, and the ugly thing that it will not be probably replicated. So I think we'll go good by good, and I think I will pass it to you to just tell the first good part of this mini dynasty of South Africa.
Yeah, so one of the stories that you spoke of as Graeme Smith batting with that broken hand, I think that symbolizes everything good about that South African team. An extremely strong leadership, that grit, resilience, and leading by example. That image of Graeme Smith batting with that broken hand is so symbolic of what that South African team brought to every single test match or every single match for that matter, across formats, across the globe that they competed in. And that for me was the good of that South African team. What about you, SS?
For me, since you already touched on leadership, I will touch upon the other aspects of that team and the great all-round and capabilities that team had, and starts from their very strong school cricket system in South Africa. I think there is one particular school from which Kalis, ABD, and Faf have all come out. They used to play multi-sports. I mean, ABD is champion in all sports during his school groupings. They made athletes. Like India made cricketers, they made athletes, and they were so multifaceted. They have always been the benchmark of fitness and fielding excellence for good over 25 years. I mean, who can forget Jonty Rhodes as a testament of it? And I think that led them to be having an edge, which was unbeatable for a lot of teams, especially the Asian teams. I would feel so much uh, goodness when it came to capabilities which allowed them to be fitter for a longer period of time. I mean, bowl with aggression, excellent in the field, and that amount of run saving that they would do would put pressure on a lot of opposition, not even in limited overs match, but also in test cricket. So I think this athletic ability, which allowed them to create really good cricketers and this golden generation, I think this stands out for me, which not a lot of teams would have, especially Asian teams.
Yeah, I when you talk about fielding capabilities, the run out in the '92 World Cup that Jonty Rhodes impacted of Inzamam Mulak, I felt that single run out changed how people across the world saw fielding
And so many
as a skill set
all-rounders
in
as
cricket.
well. I mean, you had Lance Lusner, Brian McMillan, Hansi Cronje, Jack Callis, Sean Pollock. They always have good all-rounders. Even the bowlers will always smack some runs for you. So they always are able to find that 12th player composition. I mean, of course, Callis is the biggest example of it, but they would. I mean, even the lesser ones, Justin Kemp and all these guys. I mean, they always have it in them, which is like a big, I think, big plus to their team composition.
Yeah. Now let's move on to the bad SS. We discussed the good. Now moving on to the bad, what do you think was bad about this micro dynasty, and why we are talking about it as a micro dynasty and not as a full-fledged dynasty?
I mean, for me, it's a lack of a quality spinner. I mean, they've had decent spinners in the past, Pat Simcox, I remember Nicky Boye, Robin Peterson, but none of them will have the stats and none of them have the fear. Even when they were coming to India, okay, Paul Adams had some success in India, but even in this generation, you had some spinners like Paul Harris and all. These are spinners that can block runs from one side and let Steyn, Mockle, Philander, and Parnell attack. But again, that's not sustainable for continued success anywhere actually, especially in Asia, especially against India. And I think this is the biggest factor.
So as on this podcast, we always like to reimagine cricket history. Now, my question to you is, what if South Africa had a world class spinner? By world class, I don't even mean Shane Warne or Muralidharan or Lion Ashwin level. I mean someone who is just effective. Say, for example, take Graham Swan or Monty Panesar. They played so much in the subcontinental conditions and they were fairly effective. So my question to you, SS, is what if the South African team had a spinner like Monty Panesar in their squad? How would things have been different for them?
It's a nice question. And Monty Panesar and Graeme Smith in tandem did win a series in India before the New Zealand one. We saw. I mean, in those days, there were much more flatter wickets being made. not like the WTC wickets that made by India, which are lottery wickets, which Ajaz Patel could turn up and take wickets. So I don't think a super ordinary spinner will help South Africa. But if you get a Monty Panesar, a Graeme Swan, even a Daniel Vittori for that matter, I think South Africa will win few more test matches. I think they would be much more consistent in Asia. And even in Sena conditions on day 4, day 5, you need that respite for a spinner to come in and do give some kind of variety. I think they would have won a series in India, and if they would have won that, that means they would have won series in England, and Australia away, and India away. That's, as we talked about in the previous episodes, that's tending towards a dynasty. So I think that would have made
Plus,
a big impact.
plus maybe it might have also reduced the workload of their pacers, Monty Morkel, Dale Steyn. We know about their injury concerns. Probably it would have helped there.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think we all agree to the fact that a quality spinner was a big, big miss for South Africa. But passing it over to you, what do you think was the bad part of their which they could not become a bad full-fledged dynasty?
Yeah, when I think about it, I feel they had so many superstars who were at the same time at the peak of their prowess. You have Jack Callis batting and bowling phenomenally well. ABD coming in, Hashim Amla at the peak of his form. Then you have ABD, Graeme Smith, all of them coming at the peak of their form at the same around the same period. You also have Dale Steyn, Monty Morkel. So they were a team, I believe, who were built around these galactic superstars, very, very good cricketers who somehow came around the same period of time. So it was more around that, the stars aligned for them and they had a golden generation of players. They used that, they dominated world cricket. But the other factor which also helped them was that world cricket in general was in a flux. So you had Australian legends retiring, Glenn McGrath, Shane Warne, Ricky Ponting towards the fag end of his career. A lot of transition happening in the Australian team. In Indian team going through a lot of transitions, still finding their feet in world test cricket when it comes to at least the conversations around domination. England having their spike and then coming down after internal strifes. We know what happened with Kevin Peterson, Andy Flower there. So we know a lot of issues internally that England was having, and because of which they weren't able to dominate for a very long period of time either. And there comes the South African team backed by their golden generation, who then started dominating world cricket. They rose to the number one test rankings around 2012, if I'm not wrong, after defeating England in England. I think that was the match where Hashim Amla also scored a triple century. And then they were able to dominate the test cricket scene for a couple of years or so until 2014. And then, like Ko Shastri era was still a few years away. New Zealand was also going through a flux before they were stabilized under Kane Williamson later on. So a lot of flux going around the world cricket, stars aligning for the South African team, galactic superstars at the peak of their prowess around the same time, and that is what helped them take benefit of this. When I compare that to some of the other dynasties that we have spoken of, West Indies dynasty, that was a very conscious decision that we want to dominate with pace. We want to strike fear in the minds of opposition. Similarly, Australian team was built around very strong leadership under Steve Waugh, and they had a certain brand of cricket that they wanted to play. They wanted to dominate not just on the field but also psychologically with all the sledging that went around. And I feel those were the kind of things which helped them sustain their dynasty status for a much longer period of time compared to this South African team. And that for me is the bad thing, that they weren't able to continue it because they were actually a golden generation for South Africa.
And I think also with West Indies and Australia, we talked about the replacements that were coming in through the system were also like absolutely ready for Test cricket, and that helped them as well. I mean, West Indies, you had the fast bowlers coming through, so you have the brand of play decided by the top-down approach, and it has succeeded. But then you have the replacements coming to the system who can fit in very well and continue their success. Which, because of that golden generation thing, the replacements could not take up that, especially with the injuries that were coming to Steyn and Morkel. But because you mentioned about England, and England had that small, let's call it a micro dynasty, when they won in India and Australia, if the fiasco around Peterson, Strauss, and Andy Flower hadn't happened, do you think that if England could have maintained their team and their team management, could they have posed a bigger threat? And how would South Africa would have coped with that?
I think that English side was pretty formidable in their own right. Alistair Cook, Andrew Strauss, we had Jimmy Anderson, Stuart Broad, Kevin Peterson, Ewan Bell, so many really good players over there. And I feel if they didn't have the issues that they had, because they had just won a series in India, they had won a series down under in Australia, they would have been a really strong force in World Test cricket at that point of time. And probably today we would not have been talking about South African micro dynasty, we would have been talking about the English micro dynasty today. So very interesting to think about what could have been, and I do feel it would have been it would not have been a South African dominance phase. It would have been more of a shared phase between England and South Africa at that point of time, or probably knowing the inconsistencies that South Africa has been depicting throughout the years, it might actually have been an England dominated phase. Now, with that, SS, I'm passing it back to you for the third part, which is what was the ugly part of the South African micro dynasty.
Yeah, maybe for this I pick up macro case. I mean, South Africa is a developing economy just like India, but unfortunately in cricket, India is very developed, but South Africa is not. They don't have the finances and everything. Strong domestic system, just similar to Australia, 6 teams, and you get the best players only playing for your nation, and that culminated into this golden generation that we talked about. But then you have something in parallel going around since the turn of the millennium, which was the coal pack system. Essentially, as a country, as a non-EU country, if you have a trade deal with the UK, your citizens could be treated as equivalent to EU citizens and can move to that country. And that's what happened. I mean, you had one shot players who were at the fag end of their careers taking up the coal pack deal, which was lucrative to play in the county, which is great for them because they've already served their part for South African cricket. But then you had really good players coming through South Africa system who were not getting chances because of whether the quota rules or whether the big competition in South African cricket itself to get into the national team, they would take the offer of the coal pack deal and go to represent county and just turn down South African cricket. You lost a lot of cricketers like that. I mean, the biggest example, probably Neil Wagner went to New Zealand because he did not find opportunity. He took the non-call pack route. But then you had Kevin Peterson. Okay, he had a British passport through his mother, but still lost out in the system because he did play junior cricket there. Simon Harmer, we talked about spinners. Imagine if Simon Harmer played his entire career for South Africa. Excellent spinner, has such an amazing record in county cricket. They are still touting for him to come back somehow. And the Brexit deal has made it popular for players to return. And you can see it kind of coincides with South African cricket coming back into the form after doing the Devils deal with BCCI around South African T20 as well. So I think callback combined with the quota system led a lot of good players leave South Africa. So it was never meant to be a dynasty in the first place. It was a small culmination of golden generation of players coming together for a few years of time, peak of powers, and they succeeded because of it.
I love this point that you make, SS. It resonates on so many levels with how I think about the game, and I've also spoken so many times around the commercialization of the sport and the direction that commercialization and success of the teams follows. And I definitely feel South Africa has also been, in that ways, a country impacted by the commercialization part of it. Definitely, the economy not doing well, coal pack
Yeah.
impacting them. But my question again on the what if terms is what if Brexit say happened 10 years back? You know, we
Or,
got to talk about these things.
or the trade deal that was never in place because if even if Brexit happened or not happened, if the trade deal between South Africa and UK wasn't there, then none of this call back system would have existed. But either the trade deal or the Brexit, if happened earlier, I mean, you wouldn't have this dynasty because I think some of the players would have left. I mean, you saw example of Kyle Abbott. He was the best performing ODI fast bowler before the 2015 World Cup. In semi-finals, they picked half-picked Vernon Philander. He did play a couple of test matches in 16, but then left the country in the right at the middle of his prowess. So it might have tilted the heads of a few players as well. If Brexit would have happened earlier, they would have remained in the system. Much more competitive test match team. It would help them to remain dominant for a couple of more years down the line, especially if Abbott would have gone, Simon Harmer wouldn't have gone. That would have been great for them. I think uh, but on the other side, you can also look at flip. Sometimes people will not take the callback deal, but would because of this freedom of movement, they will play counter cricket, learn from them, and return back to the system. So it had advantages, pros and cons. But I think if especially Abbott and Harmer and Riley Russo, I think I remember these three guys leaving, and I think if they wouldn't have left maybe for a couple of years, South Africa would have continued. But I think because the systemic issue, the quota system, some players would leave just because of that. And I think that would have been very difficult to live away with. So maybe a couple of years of extension, I would say, but not much. But now to you, what's your ugly story about South African cricket? Why it's not a dynasty?
Yeah, whenever we speak about South African cricket and their dominance, SS, we also have to speak about the choke job that they always pull up. Not wanting to take a below the belt shot at the South African team, but then that is something which I feel is a mental block in their own psyches. We have seen that time and again. We spoke about the moments which come to mind when we think about the South African team. I still remember ABD crying after that World Cup 2015 semi-exit. Steyn has himself admitted that he has never been the same bowler after that World Cup exit. And I think although Test matches didn't have an ICC tournament or a World Test Championship back then, but then the impact that all the other ICC events have had on these players' psyche, I think they were mentally burnt out after a certain point of time, and this has also shown up in their performances even in Test cricket. So I think that for me has to be one of the ugly parts of South African cricket, that they have been there very close to that finishing line, and time and again they have not been able to cross that, and that's a mental block that
Maybe if
has
Steyn
burnt
and
them out.
ABD, maybe if Steyn and ABD won an IPL with RCB, that would have been really helpful. But speaking of ICC events, I think they were quite in the semi-finals of the 14 T20 World Cup that happened in India, and Kohli versus Steyn, I remember that, and also the 15 World Cup semi-final. If somehow things would have fallen in their favor, if they would have won, do you think that the dynasty would have like upgraded from, let's say, a mini dynasty to a fuller dynasty? What do you think?
Yeah, I can only imagine what would have happened if Dale Steyn was steaming in to bowl for another couple of years. But I also feel, given the injury concerns, but still, I feel that South Africa would have been more competitive for at least a couple of more years. If they were able to win that 2015 World Cup, it would have given them such a strong fillip in the entire cricketing ecosystem that they have
Correct.
in South Africa.
That's a good point.
More we have seen that happen with India, right? 1983 World Cup, that is such a turning point, not just in the playing 11 that plays for India, but also what happens at the grassroots levels in the Indian domestic system. A similar thing happening with the 2011 World Cup. So we know that these ICC events can have such a huge fillip in how the cricket evolves in a particular country, and a country like South Africa, which has always had deserted history when it comes to championship wins. So I do feel that it would have given them such a strong fillip, and probably, if not at that point of time, they would have maybe built up a dynasty right now with a lot of superstars coming up. Kolpak, Brexit basically happening, a lot of their superstars coming back into the South African system. So I think it would have definitely had a huge impact on their team.
I think perfect moment for you to wrap up your ugly point about why South African cricket couldn't succeed and become a dynasty. Because now they have an ICC final coming up. If they win this, maybe that's the fillip, especially for red ball cricket. We need that. And maybe Temba Bavuma will be lifting up the trophy, and that will be quite an image to see. But there you have it, guys. That was today's episode around the South African mini dynasty. Lesser talked about, under the radar, but deserve all the credit. And we look forward to supporting them, at least from the reverse sweep show in the finals, because we don't want Australia to win another ICC trophy. And yeah, we'll see what unfolds there. But we'll be back next week with another episode on a new topic. We'll keep publishing some blog posts on our website, and check it out as well on YouTube as well. We'll keep publishing some short form content there. But till then, wishing you a nice week ahead. Bye bye.